Good afternoon. This is the Board of County Commissioners Board of Work session. It is Monday, June 12th, 2023. It is 2:03 p.m. This session is set to go until 3 p.m. This is a hybrid meeting. We're at 3000 Pacific Avenue Southeast, room 110. For public virtual attendance, you may follow along on the Thurston County YouTube channel. I'm Carolina Mejia. I'm the chair of the board. To my right is Vice Chair Ty Menser. Joining us via Zoom is Commissioner Gary Edwards. Also in the boardroom, we have County Manager Ramiro Chavez, as well as Assistant County Manager Robin Campbell and Assistant County Manager Rob Gilder. We also have Maria Aponte, who is the Director for Human Resources, and she has brought
Siegel Consultants.
yes, the consulting team who helped us do the class and comp study, and so that's what our agenda is about today, which is the class and comp study briefing. So will I pass this to?
Maybe just an opening statement, Madam Chair. Long time coming. This has been somewhat of a journey. The county embarked on the class and comp study. Today we're going to be presented to you with the help of our consultants, the findings of this study. We're not requesting the board to take any action today. This is just the beginning of a process. After this conversation, Maria and the consultants will start engaging offices and departments to go through the details of this particular findings of the report. And at some point, we'll bring this matter to the board to see some options for implementation that you will be considering of this class and comp study. So thank you, Maria and consultants, to take us to this point. And all of us, I think we're looking forward to hear the findings of this report.
Thank you. Again, Maria Ponte, HR Director. And for those in the listening audience, just as a quick recap, the reason we're here today is in, I think it was 2019, HR was tasked with doing a countywide classification and compensation study. We embarked on that, then the pandemic hit and we just did not have capacity. Then working with the leadership, I got direction to issue an RFP to hire a consultant. Following that process, Siegel was selected, and they have extensive experience conducting similar studies across the US as well as in Washington State. As Ramiro said, there's been significant amount of work that has gone into this, including employee participation, leadership. And so we're at a major milestone, and to ensure you get plenty of time to ask questions, I'm gonna present Ruth Ann Elledge. She's the Vice President and Senior Consultant for Siegel. She has her team today that have done all of the work behind the scenes. And with that, I want to welcome Ruth Ann.
Thanks, Maria, and thank you all for your time today. We're pleased to be able to talk with you today and present to you the classification and compensation study findings. With me today is Diana Sachinsky, who has been your project manager and consultant, as well as Rebecca Dayton, also a consultant, and Tarun Rumna, that have been our analysts on the study. And so we're glad to all be able to be here to cover the scope and the findings and answer any questions that you might have. And in order to do that, we put together a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation that will help guide our discussion. And again, along the way, this is a fairly informal briefing. If there are questions, we're happy to entertain and answer those questions as they may occur. So with that said, Diane, if you will share your screen, please, and we will begin this presentation. Okay, he'll move to the next slide. So today we wanted to begin by just talking a little bit about the county's objectives, or the overall purpose of the study, the scope of it, and the methodology that we've used, and our outcomes and findings, and then kind of summarize our next steps and what may occur as a result of this study. If you'll move to the next slide, please. Beginning with, when you think about the purpose of taking on an endeavor of this nature, this has been a very comprehensive and extensive study to really update and kind of modernize your job titling and job classification, to actually put together some systems that may help ease the administrative burden of administering the system, and making sure that your pay structures are equitable and actually market driven. Because the overall purpose of this study was to provide you with a system that provides you with the ability to recruit and retain the talent that's needed to be able to perform the services that the county's doing to achieve its overall mission. So in order to do that, there are several things that really need to be in place that will support the department's abilities to manage their workforce. One of those is a good, strong job classification structure. And we'll talk a little bit more as we move through this presentation about the steps that we took to develop that. But when I talk about a classification structure, we're really speaking about job titles, job documentation for each title, clarity in the differences and similarities between jobs, making sure that we understand the relationships of positions and how they all fit together within the organization. Every organization has a kind of internal hierarchy of positions. And so part of our work was to make sure that we were clear about all the jobs that were being performed and how those fit together to provide an overall classification structure for the county. And part of that included looking at career ladders for positions so that as employees come to work for the county, then they also understand what are some of their future career opportunities where they're applicable and clearly understood. We also developed updated job descriptions to make sure that your job documentation was accurate and reflect the work that's now being performed. As you know, jobs change over time, processes, workflows change, and so we wanted to provide the county with updated descriptions based on the job documentation that we had collected. Part of the study also included looking at the market and what the market was paying for similar types of work and similar types of policies that we see in the market about how they're managing their compensation. And looking really at your compensation package and how competitive it is, and making sure that your pay ranges and the grades and steps are all market driven. Finally, the last thing we've been working with HR on is just to look at how your pay is administered, your pay guidelines, pay procedures, and making sure that those are user-friendly and they're equitable and fair. So overall, what we're trying to accomplish is a class and compensation system that's accurate, it's equitable, and it is sensitive to the market so that you are able to recruit and retain those high-performing talent that you need. We had a project work plan that was divided into 5 key steps to accomplish the study. The first step, of course, was our project initiation, where we spent quite a bit of time understanding how the county is currently organized, what are your issues and concerns, what are your pain points, gathering together as much documentation as data as we could up front before we began the study, and laying out a project work plan and timeline that helped guide us through the remainder of the phases that we utilized to complete the study. Part of that also included looking at having listening sessions to hear what were some of the issues and concerns that many of your stakeholders, your department directors and leadership teams were hoping to accomplish as a result of this study. And then also developing a communication plan, because one of the things that's key to the success of the study is communication. Then we moved into the class analysis. We'll talk more about this as we move through the rest of the slides, about how we gather data on your jobs and looked at the job documentation, how we went out to the market, which is the market assessment phase, to gather data and to evaluate the competitiveness of your pay ranges to make sure that you have a pay structure that is competitive with the market. And then using those previous steps to develop recommendations for changes that you might want to consider, and what we think would help you be more competitive in the market, and then developing some options for implementation and maintenance. And so those were the key 5 steps that we took to accomplish the overall study. I'm going to ask Diana to talk a little bit about the job analysis component, and then I'll come back and talk more about the market assessment and the rest of the study.
Thanks, Ruth Ann. Good afternoon, commissioners in Thurston County. Part of the project that's really important as we move through the other steps is completing the job analysis. And the job analysis is really the basis for the classification structure, and then it drives our market assessment when we gather our data for the market pay. When we're thinking about the classification structure, what our outcome and what we intend to complete is to recommend a standardized titling format and nomenclature. This is so that, going forward, when you use the word senior or lead, that it's understood what that means. We also develop job summaries and minimum qualifications from the job description questionnaires. So the JDQ is short for Job Description Questionnaire, and that's the survey that we use to gather information from employees to understand the work that's being completed, the requirements to complete the work, and the level of knowledge, skills, and abilities required to complete the work as well. So from that information, we drafted job summaries. We also developed a draft classification structure for the county to review, provide feedback on, and ensure that there was operational alignment. We worked closely with the county to ensure that the information we were providing and recommending was appropriate and made sense for the county going forward. We conducted internal equity reviews to understand the hierarchy of jobs and ensure that there is alignment within the structure. And as Ruth Ann mentioned, we have a correct career progression to point to. We also updated job titles and to have a better linkage to market titles. One of the most important parts of completing a study like this is to ensure that any future analysis that's being done would be aligned with market titles so that you're pulling in the correct information going forward. And then we developed a classification structure that aligns county jobs based on internal relationships. When we look at building the classification structure, there are certain steps that we need to make sure we have in place before we begin. We worked closely with Thurston County project team to make sure that we were headed in the right direction and we were creating a structure that made sense going forward. We aligned and discussed titling guidelines with the county project team. From there, we distributed the JDQs to staff members and employees in late April, and that was completed in July of 2022. Once all that information was gathered, we began our analysis of the information to ensure that they were complete, accurate, and we had the information that we needed. At this point is when we would reach out to the county and discuss any questions that we had or any concerns that we had based on the information we had received. We revised titles, made job summaries and minimum qualifications. And as Ruth Ann mentioned earlier, we developed those career ladders as all of that based in the information that we received from the employees at the county. We also created job families based on distinguishing features that characterize and define the jobs. So as someone is in a position looking to move through their career, they can understand that this is a particular family where their skill set might be helpful and they can move in their career at Thurston County. Once we create the classification structure, we work with Thurston County to review that structure together, provide feedback, and create a final structure. We worked closely to identify key characteristics to understand the internal relationships of the jobs so that we ensured that the supervisory relationships were appropriate, that the education and experience was appropriate as you move through different levels in a career series. We also consolidated jobs where we found that jobs had similar responsibilities and duties. We recognized that and recommended consolidating jobs. Not only does that assist with hiring going forward, but it also creates internal equity for folks who are completing similar work. We collapsed 12 job titles and created new or rolled them into existing job titles. We maintained 228 of the current job titles that Thurston County has. We recommended that 19 incumbents be reclassified into a new or existing title that better represented the work that they performed. And we recommended retitling approximately 49 jobs to ensure consistency with the use of titles. We developed job descriptions for the city's review and finalization based on the JDQs that we received from employees. And we applied our tool called the Siegel Evaluator to these job titles to understand the internal job hierarchy at the county. I'm going to talk a little bit about the factors that are involved with the evaluation of the jobs to ensure that we recognize the internal hierarchy of the work being performed at the county. So we have 8 compensable factors that are used to measure the job's minimum qualifications, responsibilities, skills, and requirements. And these ratings are used to refine the job structure and align internal pay equity among job classifications. So when we're looking at formal education, the factors that we want to understand are what is the minimum training and education required to do the work for this position at an entry level. This measures the minimum requirements, not preferences. So we're looking at what is required to step into that job and perform the work. This factor is very similar to work experience. We're looking for the minimum experience required to complete the work as you enter into the position. And then we're looking at management and supervision. We want to understand to what degree a position is responsible for overseeing other folks at the county, whether it be in a lead position, whether it be at a higher level director position where you're overseeing larger teams, or whether it be occasionally you're providing some guidance and feedback to other employees or contractors or vendors that might be working with the county. We want to understand the level of responsibility there and the scope and the breadth of that work. Human collaboration skills, what that is measuring is the personal interaction that occurs on a daily basis for a particular position, whether it be internal or external contacts, with the amount of frequency the position might have with that particular contact, and the impact that it would have on the organization. Another factor is titled freedom to act. And what this measures is the level of supervision or the absence of supervision that the position is afforded to complete their work. We want to understand if the position is closely monitored or if the position has freedom to make decisions and take on the impact of what could be a decision that might have an adverse effect at the county. We also want to understand the knowledge and skills required of a position to complete the work to a satisfactory level. We want to understand the complexity, the level of expertise, whether it be at the beginner level or at the intermediate or expert level. We want to have a good understanding of what type of work and knowledge and skills are needed to complete that work. Then we measured fiscal responsibility. Does the position have responsibility to oversee funds in any way? And what is the scope of that responsibility that they may or may not have? And then, of course, we want to understand the working conditions and the physical effort involved. We know that some positions work mainly outdoors. We know that some positions work indoors. We know that some are a combination. So we want to better understand what that responsibility is and what employees are exposed to in a particular position. Dan, I'm going to hand this.
Yeah, that's a good summary of the classification piece. And the reason why that component is so important is that not every job will have direct market value. Some jobs are unique. Some jobs we may not be able to match in the market. But if we can map jobs together with similar levels of scope and responsibilities, then in that manner, we can apply the market data that we gather to the entire workforce. And so we went through a very systematic way of mapping jobs to the final market data once we've had this classification process completed. So the market assessment process, which was starting near the end of the class analysis, included 4 key phases. The first one was to select jobs to include in the market survey. This was a custom survey. And so we were able to select a large number of jobs to include in the survey to gather data directly from your peers. And then determining who your peers were to solicit data for the survey process. And then finally to developing this custom survey that took the jobs that had been selected to be in the survey, writing job summaries of those work and the minimum quals to be able to match with the market similar types of work, because we do not match in the market based on job title. We match based on job content. And so after we had completed the survey document itself, it was distributed. We gathered the data from your peers, and then the market analysis was performed. So a comment about the market assessment process. The purpose of this is really to gather what we consider relevant data. Oftentimes employees are thinking about, what does this mean for my individual pay? At this point in the process, we're looking at your pay structures to make sure that they're aligned with the market, so that then individual employee pay can be addressed later on. But at this point in time, we're trying to ensure that your pay ranges and your pay steps are aligned with market. And to do that, we were able to identify what we call benchmark jobs to include in the survey to collect data on. There were 107 job titles, so over a third of your positions were included in the survey. And we call those benchmark jobs, and they were basically statistically identified by a workforce analysis. We looked at all of your job titles, how many had incumbents, the number of incumbents that were in each title, what level in the organization they were, what bargaining unit was represented by them, what department they existed in, did a statistical analysis to identify these 107 job titles and ensure that we felt like they were positions that could be readily matched with your peers. So that statistically represented the county. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, we mapped all the other jobs that were not in the survey to one or more of the benchmark job titles to be able to conduct our analysis. In determining the market comparators, early on in the study, we had the listening sessions, and we gathered information from your senior leadership team about who we should collect data from. So as a result, we initially identified 14 public sector employers that we were going to use as peers, and that was based on how close they were to you. Who did you compete with when you were hiring? Who did you lose people to? There were some counties that were of similar size, and there were other characteristics, but these are the 14 public sector employers that received the survey. And about half of them actually completed the survey, and the other gave us all of their data so that we could complete the survey for them. So again, jobs statements were written for each benchmark job title. We matched based on job content and not based on job titles. That did feed back into the classification analysis, because we were looking at what were the commonly used titles that we were founding when we asked organizations what title they were using to match the job content and the job requirements. But we were basically looking at the job content requirements and not titles for matching purposes. We used what we call the 75% rule, which states that if we looked at the job content of the other peers, their predominant core responsibilities were similar to what your positions were performing. And we required a minimum of at least 4 matches to ensure that we were validating the market data in our analysis. We did adjust raw data from the individual locations based on a cost of labor index. Economic Research Institute has a national index for cost of labor. So essentially what they do is they take a series of jobs and do a comparison of what the cost of those jobs are across the country to establish a national index for comparison of labor markets from one location to another. And we use cost of labor because it basically is measuring the supply and demand of labor. While cost of living influences cost of labor, there are other factors that also influence cost of labor, like supply and demand for the actual applicant pool and the number of availability that you have in the labor pool, as well as other factors that influence what other organizations are paying for a position. So we use the cost of labor indexed, and we adjusted actual raw data up or down based on the differences in cost of labor from each individual location. Again, these market matches were vetted through our quality review process to ensure we were comfortable with the matching of the positions. We actually shared the data also with the county for them to do a comparison as well, and we received some good feedback from them. So we feel very comfortable that the matches are appropriate for use with our analysis. So we took the data from all the market information that we received, and then in order to begin to look at your pay ranges, we typically select a point in a pay range for comparison to the market data. And in discussions with the county, we determined that we would look at the top step of each range to make sure that it was competitive with the market. If you look at the next slide, you'll see that we also gathered other data besides just market data. We asked a lot of questions about pay practices, everything from pay schedule design, how employees move through the pay ranges, how pay increases are awarded to employees, if they had educational incentive pay or certification or pay or automobile allowance, bilingual pay. You can see the various pay practices that we asked if they were in use by your peers, and if so, what was the level of payout that they provided. We also asked about any other pay supplements or pay for special skills, bonuses, and shift differentials. So again, this was a fairly robust survey, in addition to the data collection on the pay ranges. So in looking at the pay practices and pay policies, the county is generally competitive with what the rest of its peers are doing. We also found that your pay structures are pretty competitive at both your entry, mid, and top step. So we did an analysis at all three levels to kind of give you a sense of where you might have some misalignment with market. And in doing our analysis, we usually have a corridor of plus or minus 5% to determine market competitiveness. So if anything it was between 95 and 105% of market, we consider that within that corridor of competitiveness. In our analysis of your overall pay ranges, your minimums are within that plus or minus 5%. You're slightly above for the midpoint and maximum of your pay structures. So overall, they're in pretty good shape. One of the things that is a benefit of looking at your pay structures and your actual job classifications is to try to bring them all together in one location so that you can look at internal relationships as well as make sure that they are established in ranges that are paying similar types of pay. In order to do that, we created one general pay structure with several levels, 20 or more levels in it, so that you could assign jobs to each level and know that those jobs were not only market competitive, but also internally equitable with each other. So we aligned the pay structures using top step as your point of comparison to create ranges or to confirm ranges that were competitive with market, made sure that we had jobs assigned to ranges that reflected the internal relationships and the external market data, and then confirmed that those relationships were appropriate. So we worked very closely with the county to make sure that all supervisor subordinate relationships were appropriate, that internal relationships and that internal hierarchy were reflected in how those jobs were placed into the pay range, as well as the market data to reinforce that. And then, of course, at the end, we looked at where should employees be placed within those ranges and gave you some options for implementation costing. So we finalized all of our work to develop the structure, show how jobs aligned with each other and how they fit into those structures. And then should you choose to implement them, what could be some options for costing. And then finally, we have been working with the county to look at how to continue to maintain your pay structures and pay ranges, because as you know, market moves. Market moves on a fairly regular basis, and there needs to be built into your annual processes to review that market pay movement and how that's affected your structures, and whether or not you do need to make an adjustment to your structures to retain your competitiveness with the market, and determine what would be the funds that would be required should you need to adjust your structures to do that. We've also, in addition to developing some guidelines for that, we're looking at your pay policies and seeing if there's any recommendations that we think will help administratively help the county further in their administration of pay, procedures for hiring or promotions, those kinds of things. So that's at the final to kind of bring it all together in one package. is the methodology, the classification structure, the pay structure, and the recommendations for management of your pay system. All has been put together in one nice package. So I'm going to stop here, and I think we are through with the formal presentation and see what kind of questions we might be able to answer.
Thank you. And can we stop sharing the screen? Commissioner Edwards, we'll start with you, sir.
Okay, I think we talked about this several months ago, I think, with Maria, and that is on your comparables and how the cost of labor and the cost of living, how there can be a conflict there. So you'd be surprised, maybe you wouldn't be surprised, you'd be surprised how many of our employees don't live in Thurston County. They actually live in Lewis or Mason County. And so they're willing to commute for the job, so to speak. So I'm looking forward to kind of reviewing that analysis to see how that all fits, because there's the east side, west side factor as well. So I think it's a great presentation. Looks really good. Really be interested to study it just a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Menser?
I don't really have questions about what was just presented. My questions are about then what do we do with all those
Next
conclusions
steps.
and the next steps, but I tracked everything that was presented.
I have a couple of questions in regards to, on the report, it said that 9 benchmark job titles do not have sufficient market data to make a comparison. And so with those 9 positions, I'm curious, right, on what's the strategy to move forward on those positions where there is no data? I mean, it seems like they're unique, which one of them I was surprised, which was the court commissioners, because all the counties that I'm seeing, they also have court commissioners. And so I was just surprised to see that it wasn't, besides the cities, because they don't really have that system, but the counties usually have, I understand smaller counties do not, but Pierce and Snohomish, Yakima,
I can answer that, and it's because the court commissioners aren't on a range. They're a percentage of the
Okay.
either district court or superior court judges, and that's the difference.
Okay.
And so.
And perhaps that is tied to legislative action.
Correct, and many of those other counties are at 90% of the judges' salaries, and we're at 85.
85.
So that would be something that the board could consider into the future.
And how about the rest of the position? That was the only one where but the rest of the positions that got,
Had no market data.
yeah,
So they would be treated like the non-benchmark jobs, where we would be mapping them to those positions that we do have data. As I mentioned, we have a minimum match requirement of at least 4, and those jobs did not have 4 matches. So we have mapped them to a job or a group of jobs, because in some cases there's other jobs that have several benchmark jobs that have similar characteristics as those jobs. And so we can map them to that market data to be able to place them into a range of pay that we think is competitive.
Whenever you're done, I thought.
as a follow-up to that, so then has that not been done yet, and is that going to be done, or where is that at?
It has been in the recommended structure that we have given them an entire structure with all of the jobs assigned to a level within that structure. And so that has been provided to the county for their consideration.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
At the beginning, you accurately pointed out that we were interested in career ladder, but there's nothing in the conclusion about that, or is that something you were able to find places where that works, or that didn't work? What was kind of the result of that piece of the analysis?
So in the job classification piece, one of the things that we did was we established levels. So you may have levels of administrative support, or you may have levels of, I think we did want some for elections. I don't remember all of them right offhand, but the job titling is reflecting those as a 1, 2, 3, 4, so that you know what that career sequence is within the job classification system. And in the pay structure, similarly, they are at different levels within the pay structure so that employees can see that if I come in at one level, the 2 levels up here, the 3 level is here, and there's also differentiation in the job descriptions that explains the differences between one level and the next.
So I would see that in looking at the revised list of titles, job titles you're seeing.
Yes, you would.
Madam Chair,
Go ahead, sir.
this might be for Maria, but how did we do as far as the personnel in the sheriff's office around that records and clerical portion that we were having difficulty with about a year ago, I think it was?
So the consultant did look at the job title, legal assistant and bureau assistant. With the legal assistant, they found comparables. With the bureau assistant, they did not. And so, as Ruth Ann was saying, then we looked at that internal matching based on similar jobs. And so we'll be providing, we wanted to do the first presentations to the commissioners before we actually start to share out some of this information. And so that'll be the next step, is to provide our electeds, department directors, the report, as well as the unions, because they are waiting to receive the study report. So those are our next steps.
Okay, thank you.
I want to go, my second question is in regards to the classification structure and methodology. And that was on slide 7, page 7. And so some of the recommendations I see there collapse 12 job titles into a new or existing job title. Recommended reclassifying 19 positions, and recommended retitling 49 positions. And so I'm just wondering how that compares basically to kind of the study that we're seeing here, and kind of what's the impact.
Financial impact.
So the collapsing was basically looking at, when we collected job questionnaires, employees filled out questionnaires, and as we began to look at differences and similarities between work that was being performed in job titles, we would say, this looks very similar. You know, it's doing similar record keeping, it's doing similar types of research or analysis or whatever. And we would say, does it make sense if we have a title that reflects this work and those incumbents be in that title, so that they're being, that way they can all be paid in consistently or equitably across the organization. So we only found about 12 titles that we felt like had that crossover, that duplication of work. The 19 incumbents, those are individual employees who were in a title that really did not reflect the work that they were doing. And so sometimes they were doing work at a higher level and needed to be moved to a higher level position, or they were doing work that had evolved and was different from what that job was doing. So we created a new title for that to better reflect their work. And so there were 19 individual employees that happened too. And then for the jobs that we recommended title changes, a lot of it had to do with saying everybody that's going to be, that supervisors is going to have a title that's used as supervisor or as a lead or as a senior or as at a higher level. So from a pay perspective, it's not going to be a significant impact because we're just trying to make sure that positions are aligned correctly. Now, what will impact actual individual salaries is, should you choose to adopt the ranges and they have steps in them, is to put people on the closest step, if you will, or put them on a step to make sure that they are on step in a range. But the classification structure methodology is not a real driver of cost. Does that answer the question?
Yes.
And
Thank
some
you.
of the work that I'm doing is taking, I mean, this is a lot of information and I'm trying to chunk it down to smaller. So by office and department, and then looking at the job groupings. It's labor intensive, but I think that it will help when we deliver the message to the greater audience.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of moving parts.
Madam Chair,
Go ahead, Commissioner Edwards.
when you have a requirement of 4 similarities, are those kind of exact similarities that you required, or was it discretionary as to you just kind of get close? How did you draw that line? I'm wondering to where you would come up with 4. Did you find that they were pretty exact or just somewhat exact, I guess? I'm just curious.
Well, we're using the 75% rule. So each one of those 4 has to predominantly match your position. The reason why we have a minimum number of matches is to avoid any, what is the term I'm trying to think of, Rebecca and Diana, where you're price setting or wage setting. So if you have more than 4 or more responses, then you're able to, you're looking at a variety of different sources of data rather than having just a couple of different sources. Does that answer your question?
Commissioner Edwards?
Oh, I see. I was on mute there for a minute, talking to myself. Yeah. Yes, I just wanted to know kind of how close it was. So that's fine. I'm still kind of stumped on those legal assistants or legal aids or clerical or records, that we've got that one segment that we're trying to figure out. So thank you.
Any additional questions? Okay.
So maybe we can talk with the board about next steps. I briefly stated that perhaps the next step is to start engaging offices and departments and start paring down. Correct me if I'm wrong, Maria, but the objective is to bring some implementation strategies to the board to consider during the budget deliberation process in the fall. And that will be more of a more dollars and cents funds and everything else, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
And so the study report itself is extensive, and that's what I will be issuing this week. Again, wanted to give the commissioners that opportunity first, and continue the work on looking at the where positions have landed, particularly those where we're using their job evaluation factor grade. And we will see changes. So even where a position may appear that it's in market, once we place it into the pay structure, it could see an increase. And in some cases, it's just going to be neutral. But so a lot of science behind all of this work that, and it's not, again, I'm going to repeat, it's very time consuming.
Okay. Well, thank you, Maria. Thank you to Siegel for joining us today and giving us this presentation. It is 2:48 p.m. We are adjourned. Thank you.